The plantation yard fell still. Julia stood beneath the merciless sun, her newborn daughter a fragile weight against her breast, and heard Master Firmino's decree. His voice was flint striking stone. Bury her. Today, she ceases to exist. The overseer's gaze was a physical pressure. The other enslaved women held their breath in a shared, suffocating silence. How could a life be saved under eyes that saw everything and felt nothing? Julia's hands trembled, but her spirit did not. She stepped into the shallow grave, the earth cool and yielding beneath her feet, and pressed her child to her heart. To preserve this one precious life, she would have to enact a masterpiece of deception, her only tools a performance of grief and an absolute, unyielding love. Night descended upon the slave quarters like a shroud. Julia moved to her straw pallet with measured steps, one hand clasped over her chest, as if to contain a sorrow so vast it threatened to shatter her form. The other women made space, their own histories of loss granting them an intimate understanding of this fresh, silent agony. The air carried a faint, undeniable scent, the sweet, persistent odor of fresh milk. It was an aroma that spoke of life, a truth no performed mourning could conceal. As she sat, the coarse fabric of her dress, still damp with swallowed tears, and the day's terror chafed against her skin. Her companions needed no explanation. They could discern the difference between mourning an end and aching for a presence. A communion of suffering existed among them, a language born of relentless hardship, and a faith that stubbornly clung to the oppressed. A young woman named Benedita approached slowly. She placed a folded cloth beside Julia and let her whisper fall like a benediction. God sees. Then she withdrew, leaving Julia to the long, stretching hours of the night. Time itself seemed to dilate, bearing witness. Julia rested her forehead on her drawn-up knees, and silent tears traced paths through the dust on her skin. Each drop seemed to carry an image, her daughter, a tiny secret wrapped in forest leaves, dependent on the mercy of the wilderness and the grace of a miracle. Her own heart pulsed like a beacon, uselessly calling the child home, shackled by the invisible, weightier chains of her circumstance. In the deepest watch of the night, a tender breeze found its way through the cracks in the walls. Julia lifted her face, drew a breath that shuddered with resolve, and for the first time since sunset, closed her eyes not in despair but in petition. Her prayer was a mere breath, a mother's primal plea, for warmth to find her baby, for compassionate arms to gather her, for the ancient woods to stand guard until dawn. Her faith was not a trumpet's blast, but the sound of bare feet on soft earth, steady, purposeful, leaving no trace for hostile eyes. The women observed as Julia's hand drifted to the aching tightness in her breast. It was a gesture of biological truth, a testament that a mother's body bears witness to life even when the world commands death. Benedita, watching from her own mat with eyes that had learned to cry without sound, understood the profound weight of a love concealed for its own preservation. She knew that Master Firmino, in his cruel calculus, believed he had extinguished a line and buried a secret. He failed to comprehend that some bonds are tempered and strengthened in the very fire meant to destroy them. When the rooster's cry fractured the pre-dawn gloom, Julia rose. The grief she had displayed for the master's benefit now became a garment she wore with conscious care, a shield of perceived submission. The entire quarter sensed a shift within her. The raw pain remained, but beneath it now glowed a steady, unwavering flame, the love for a daughter who lived. As she stepped into the yard, what showed in her bearing was not brute strength, but profound resilience, the kind forged in the silent, inviolable depths of the soul where no external authority can ever reign. The life Firmino believed interred was already, inexorably, beginning its journey back. The forest edge at dawn was a realm of mist and muted sound, as if the day hesitated to unveil its hidden sorrow. The chorus of waking birds was pierced by a thin, insistent cry, the sound of life demanding acknowledgement. Donna Candida, the village midwife, her frame bent by years but her perception sharp, paused on the narrow path. She heard it not with her ears first, but with her heart, an instrument fine, tuned to the frequency of fragile beginnings. Pushing aside dew, heavy foliage with hands that had ushered countless souls into the world, she discovered the source. It was not merely an infant. It was a statement, an act of profound courage left between the earth and despair. The baby girl was swaddled in broad leaves, her skin warm against the lingering chill of the night. Her cry was not one of fear, but of instinctual will. Life calling out for life. Candida knelt, her joints protesting, and placed a gentle finger on the tiny chest. The vigorous heartbeat beneath was an answer to an unasked question. What is born in the shadows, she whispered to the hushed woods, deserves the light. With the practiced tenderness of her vocation, she gathered the child. The baby settled against her as if recognizing a destined harbor. The midwife's eyes scanned the ground, noting the disturbed earth, the signs of a frantic, loving retreat. she knew the signature of a mother who had wrestled fate itself. Cradling the child, Candida turned toward the village. The wind, soft and strangely warm, brushed her wrinkled cheek, carrying a certainty she could not ignore. This child was no accident of abandonment, she was the offspring of an imposed silence. The villagers they passed cast curious glances at the bundle, but asked no questions. In such times, excessive curiosity was often an impediment to providence. In the quiet sanctuary of her home, Candida lit a fire, warmed water, and began the rituals of care. She cleansed the child of soil and leaf, and the baby's brief protest gave way to a profound calm, as if she sensed sanctuary had been found. Wrapped now in a soft blanket held near the window's light, the girl seemed to possess a depth in her gaze, as if she carried a story that would one day need telling. The name arrived unbidden, as if delivered on the same wind that had guided Candida to her. Maria do Rosário, a name of protection, of remembrance, of promise. Speaking it aloud sent a tremor of destiny through the old woman's bones. The child now had a name, a hearth, and a guardian who would defend her with her final breath. As the sun climbed, illuminating the village, Candida looked toward the distant line of trees that hid the plantation. She knew, with a certainty that settled in her marrow, that a mother wept in the slave quarters. She knew, too, that life has a persistent habit of reclaiming its narratives. Injustice may attempt to close a path, but existence insists on opening another. That morning, a child retrieved from the leaves began to weave the thread that would, in time, unravel the story Firmino had tried to enter. A peculiar quiet lay over the Corugo Fundo plantation, a silence so thick it stifled even the animals. Senor Firmino emerged from the great house early, his expression hardened into a mask, yet a restless energy vibrated beneath the surface. He was a man pursued by his own shadow. He understood that an act like his could not simply fade, it had to be actively suppressed, entombed beneath layers of enforced silence. Gathering a group of enslaved people in the yard, he spoke in a low, corrosive tone, his eyes avoiding theirs. The events of the previous day were to be unspoken, unwitnessed, unremembered. Any deviation would be met with exemplary punishment. It was a threat woven from familiar cloth, yet the air felt charged differently, as if the very soil beneath their feet was saturated with a truth it refused to digest. The enslaved women exchanged fleeting glances, a silent network of understanding. To Firmino, memory was the enemy. Benedita, holding the vision of Julia's desperate eyes within her, bowed her head but felt a revolt in her spirit. It is a peculiar violence to command a heart to forget a life. Yet, in that brutal economy, silence was the final currency of survival. How many such secrets lay buried in the plantation's foundations, hidden between midnight tears and scars the sun never saw? From the doorway, Donna Leonor observed her husband. A restless disquiet had taken root in her, an instinctual whisper that Firmino was guarding a chasm. Her sleep was troubled by formless anxieties, the house felt hollow. Her cautious inquiries were met with brusque dismissals, a telltale roughness from a man usually so precise with his words. Suspicion, once a seed, began to put forth its first, fragile shoots. In the overseer's shed, Sebastiano absorbed the master's decree with a thin, cruel smile. He was a connoisseur of fear, and enforced silence was a medium in which his power flourished. He stored Firmino's command like a weapon, and patrolled the yard, his very presence a reinforcement of the edict. His eyes, however, sought not compliance but the crack, the misplaced tear, the unguarded glance, any fissure through which he could exert his dominance. The knowledge of the false burial moved through the plantation like a subterranean current. Hands trembled at their work not from the weight of the lie, but from the burden of the truth it concealed. And Julia, moving through her duties, clung to a quiet, inviolable certainty. The child lived. That small, fierce knowledge was a lodestar in a landscape of pain. In the afternoon, Donna Leonor, passing through the yard, caught sight of Julia. She arrested, struck by the quality of the woman's expression. It was not defiance, but a profound, settled sorrow, the kind unique to those who have lost what should have been sacred. A reflexive hand flew to Leonor's own chest, her heart quickening with a strange, empathetic echo. But Firmino, ever vigilant, summoned her inside, severing the nascent connection. By nightfall, the plantation resembled an organism suppressing a fever. Firmino mistook the quiet for control. Those who understood the nature of buried wrongs knew it for what it was, a breath held, awaiting the inevitable moment of exhalation. The sun had not yet reached its zenith when Overseer Sebastiano made his entrance into the yard, his stride a study in predatory leisure. His gaze swept over the slave quarters like a scythe, searching for the slightest sign of vulnerability. Since the day of the burial, his attention had coiled around Julia with a particular unsettling intensity. He found her at the washing stones, her movements mechanical. He stood behind her, a venomous silence. Sensing the disturbance her body created, he finally leaned close, his whisper a drop of poison in her ear. "Those who conceal pain are concealing sin." The words sank into the space between them. Julia's heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands continued their work, her face a placid mask. Survival had taught her that sometimes perfect stillness is the most potent form of resistance. He lingered, a patient shadow, awaiting a crack in her composure. Her unwavering silence frustrated him. To a man like Sebastiano, the quiet of an enslaved woman was inherently suspect, a mute insolence. He carried his campaign to the kitchen, where Benedita and another woman, Teresa, prepared the noon meal. He announced, louder now, "A secret is a rot within the soul." Teresa fumbled a spoon. Sebastiano's smile was a brief, cold flicker. He understood the contagion of fear. Yet, this particular silence felt different, not merely fearful, but protective, collective. Later, at the clothesline, he cornered Julia again. Sorrow leaves its signature in the eyes. He prodded, attempting to mine her soul. Julia lifted her face, meeting his gaze not with rebellion, nor with submission, but with a terrible, gentle clarity. It was the strength of those who have endured the unendurable, a quality that unsettled him deeply. He began to whisper among the others, planting seeds of doubt, suggesting Julia's calm was a veneer for rebellion. His aim was not truth, but erosion. He sought her collapse. For in breakdowns, truths often spill out. But Julia did not break. Despite the physical ache of milk, the sleepless vigils, the soul-deep yearning, she maintained a serenity that defied his understanding. It was her faith that ultimately disarmed him, a quiet, immovable force that seemed to whisper from her very core, what belongs to God, no man can truly claim. His surveillance intensified, becoming a nightly prowl, a dawn patrol, a relentless inquisition. Yet he harvested nothing but a deeper, more resilient silence. With each failed attempt, a fundamental truth became clearer to all but him. Some pains cannot be silenced by threat, some bonds cannot be severed by decree, and some secrets, when hunted, only grow deeper roots, biding their time to break through the surface. Years passed, marking their passage on the lives of those bound by fate. In the modest wooden house in the village, Maria do Rosario grew under Dona Candida's guardianship. The midwife raised her not with pity, but with a reverence reserved for a sacred trust. The girl moved between shadow and light with an innate grace, her smile possessing a luminescent quality that seemed to soften the edges of the world. She became Candida's helper, accompanying her on rounds, learning the language of herbs and the music of human suffering. Maria possessed an empathetic wisdom beyond her years, offering comfort not with words, but with a silent, anchoring presence. The villagers began to note a peculiar radiance about her, not of beauty, but of essence. Some called it a gift. Others murmured she seemed to inhabit two worlds. One afternoon, sorting herbs, Maria asked why some plants held powerful scents and others none. "Each plant holds both medicine and memory," Candida replied, "just like people." Maria absorbed this, her serious nod suggesting the words had found a permanent home within her. As she matured, Candida observed familiar echoes in the tilt of her head, the cadence of her walk, a haunting resonance with a face from the past. The midwife understood that children marked by extraordinary beginnings often shoulder extraordinary destinies. One morning, combing Maria's hair, she spoke quietly, "Your path, child, will one day lead you back to the place of your first breath. And when it does, your light will reveal what has been kept in darkness." Maria stored the words as a mystery yet to be solved. Unaware, her every laugh, her gentle demeanor, was a quiet tremor moving through the world, stirring the echoes of a story the plantation had labored to erase. The great house began to decay from the inside, as if its timbers were poisoned by a moral sickness. Donna Leonor's health, once a pillar of the household, deteriorated inexplicably. A creeping fatigue gave way to dizzy spells, then a fever that burned with a restless, cognitive fire. She tossed in her bed, her delirium giving voice to fragments of a suppressed past, a lost child, a cry in the corridor, a weight of unnamed guilt. Amalia, the maid who kept vigil, felt a profound disquiet listening to these fever-born confessions. They carried the ring of truth, not fantasy. Each time Firmino entered the sick room, he averted his eyes, as if his wife's fragility was an accusation. Her illness was dragging the past into the present. In the quarters, Julia learned of the mistress's sickness through Benedita. Though no affection existed between them, Julia felt a pang of profound compassion. Suffering in its raw form was a great leveler. That night she knelt in a dark corner and prayed not for justice, but for peace for the ailing woman, a grace born of a heart that captivity had not succeeded in making small. The plantation itself seemed to hold its breath. An unspoken understanding permeated the air. Donna Leonor's fever was not merely of the body, but of the conscience. It was an omen, The past, patient and relentless, was preparing its return. The afternoon sky was a portent, laden with slow, moving clouds. With Donna Leonor worsening, the village sent its most reliable courier of remedies, Maria do Rosario. She walked the path with her basket, unaware that each step was a homecoming. As the plantation gates came into view, a powerful, inexplicable recognition tightened her chest. The eerie familiarity of a dreamscape made real. Amalia opened the door. Upon seeing Maria, her eyes widened in stunned recognition. Before Maria could proceed to the sick room, a figure emerged from the parlor. Firmino, intending to chastise the intrusion, froze. The world seemed to drop from beneath him. He was staring at a ghost, at a living rebuttal of his own command. Her eyes, they were Julia's eyes. Her smile, the line of her jaw, the quiet dignity of her posture, it was all an impossible, breathing indictment. Maria offered a polite, "Good afternoon." Firmino could not form a reply. He stood paralyzed, watching as Amalia, breaking the spell of his horror, guided Maria toward the bedroom. As the door opened, Firmino felt a panic so complete it was akin to drowning. The truth, wearing a face and a name, had just walked into the heart of his domain. Inside the dim room, Maria approached the bed. Donna Leonor's fever-glazed eyes opened. They focused, then sharpened with a shock of clarity. Her lips parted. With an effort that summoned her last reserves of strength, she raised a trembling hand. "Come closer." Maria obeyed. Leonor's thin fingers reached up, touching Maria's hair, tracing her cheek with a tenderness that startled the girl. In a voice raspy with emotion and insight, the lady uttered the words that would change everything. "Child, it is as if you stepped from the very walls of this house." The statement hung, immense and illuminating. Maria felt a shiver of destiny. Amalia clutched a towel, understanding dawning. Outside the door, Firmino heard the phrase and felt its finality. "It is as if you stepped from the very walls of this house." He could bear it no longer. He shoved the door open, his entrance a violent disruption. Finding concern for his wife's fatigue, he demanded the visit end. His nervousness was too acute, his authority too brittle. Confused, Maria retrieved her basket. As she left, she felt the weight of the sick woman's gaze following her, a connection severed too soon. The news traveled to the quarters on swift, silent feet. A village woman named Sisi, arriving with provisions, sought out Julia. Finding her by the stream, she grasped her hands, her voice thick with emotion. "I have seen your daughter. She lives, Julia. She lives." The universe contracted to a single point. The babbling water fell silent. Julia's legs gave way, and she sank to the stony ground. A hand pressed to her mouth as a sob, decades in the making, broke free. Sisi poured out the description, the young woman from the village, the unmistakable resemblance, the stir her presence caused in the great house. Julia wept, tears of agony remembered, and hope resurrected. She wept for the cold forest floor, for the emptiness of the staged grave, for every lonely dawn. Benedetta found her and held her as the storm of release passed. When she could speak, Julia looked toward the heavens, her face transformed. "I knew," she whispered, her voice raw with conviction. "I felt her. God preserved her." That night, she did not sleep. A new formidable force animated her, a love that now had a destination. She knew Firmino would rage, Saraceno would stalk, the world would resist. But for the first time since that terrible day, she breathed the air of possibility. Hope had ceased to be an abstract longing, it had become a person, and that person was near. Dawn brought an anticipatory silence. Julia rose knowing her steps were now guided by purpose greater than survival. At Donna Candida's, Maria prepared another basket, unaware that the veil was about to be torn away. When Maria entered the plantation yard, Julia watched from a window, her heart a wild drum. There she was, her life, her triumph, walking with a grace that was her birthright. A compulsion stronger than fear propelled Julia forward. She crossed the yard, her approach noted by Firmino from the parlor window. He strode out onto the porch as she reached the steps. "You have no business here," he hissed, his voice a low threat. Julia did not lower her eyes. She met his gaze with a calm that unnerved him. It was the look of long-deferred reckoning. From within the sick room, Donna Leonor's voice, frail but unequivocal, cut through the tension. "Let her enter." The door held open by a weeping Amalia, Julia stepped across the threshold. Maria, standing by the bedside, turned. The moment their eyes met, a silent, powerful recognition passed between them, a key turning in a lock fashioned by blood and time. Julia moved to her daughter. She reached out, her work-roughened hand cradling Maria's face with unbearable tenderness. Then, she turned her gaze to Donna Leonor, to Firmino frozen in the doorway, and to the witnesses present. Her voice, when it came, did not shake. It carried the weight of years of silence, now finally spent. She was never buried. He commanded me to end her life, but God said no. The truth, spoken aloud after so long, had the force of a physical blow. Maria gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as the world she knew rearranged itself around this central, monumental fact. Donna Leonor let out a muffled cry of horrified comprehension. Firmino seemed to shrink, the architecture of his authority crumbling into dust. In that room, heavy with the ghosts of lies, the buried story finally drew its first free breath. What followed was not a spectacle of vengeance, but a solemn unfolding of justice. Donna Leonor, from her bed of convalescence, summoned respected women from the village. Before them, with a clarity born of terrible enlightenment, she formally acknowledged Maria as Julia's daughter, extending the protection of the household's name to the child she had unknowingly wronged. It was a moral restitution, the only one within her power to give. Overseer Salasciano, sensing the shift in the foundation of power, erupted in bluster, accusing Julia of falsehood. Donna Leonor, marshalling the final vestiges of her station, ordered him removed from the plantation. His exit, witnessed in stark silence, was the unmooring of a petty tyranny. For Firmino, no whip fell, no jail cell awaited. His punishment was more profound and, for a man of his pride, more excruciating. As the story permeated the region, he was met with averted eyes, closed doors, and the silent, total condemnation of the community. The social currency he valued most, respect, honor, standing, was rendered worthless. He became a ghost in his own world, haunted by the living proof of his cruelty. In the quarters and in the village, a subtle but definitive change settled. The mother and daughter, united, began the slow work of weaving their severed histories into a single thread. Julia's embrace held the anguish of years of separation. Maria's held the wonder of a mystery solved, of a belonging finally claimed. It was a healing, a reclamation. The land itself seemed to sigh, as if a long-held tension had been released. They say earth that is forced to swallow innocence becomes barren. But that day, an opposite truth seemed to manifest. A truth, once raised from its imposed grave, could bring a kind of peace, restoring a balance that violence had disrupted. The story Firmino sought to bury ended not with a dramatic clash, but with the quiet, irrevocable power of truth affirmed. It ended with memory overcoming silence, and with a light, long hidden, finally shining where it was always meant to be. If this narrative of resilience and the unbreakable bonds of love resonated with you, please share this story and subscribe to Tales of Slavery for more powerful chronicles of the human spirit confronting history's darkest chapters. Your engagement ensures these vital stories continue to be told. Let us know in the comments where you are joining us from.